3, 2, 1. Okay, it's been a while. Let's get some more friends on the couch, huh? New friends, old friends. We're talking about rackets, not real friends. I don't have any of those. This is a crazy racket. I'll talk more about that in a second. It's actually kind of the reason this whole video is being made. Pure Aero 98. Are the other ones in here? What is this? What is this? This one, also important for the video, but I'll put it here. In fact, I'll put this one over here as well. This is the Blade 104 V9. Where do I want to start? First of all, I should say I know it's been a while since my last video. I actually relocated from Sacramento, California to Las Vegas. So that move was a big deal. Obviously, moving is a big deal and a big fat hassle. But I more or less settled into the new location, but I'd say only 25% of the stuff actually feels like organized. I mean, if I were to turn the camera around, you'd see a mess of things on the floor. You guys want to see? I'll show you my mess. Video's all about presentation and angles, but on the other side, whoa, that's not so bad, that's not so bad, that's not so bad. Okay, that's kind of bad, you got a lot of stuff. Oh, okay. Okay, and yeah, that's just one room. By the way, these are my giant acoustic panels, bass traps. I put them on the ceiling to tame low frequencies, because low frequencies like to bounce around. Low frequencies are omnidirectional, which means they kind of travel in every direction, and yeah, I'm not gonna talk about acoustic treatment so much in this video. This is a tennis video. I've recently taken dampeners off of my tennis racket. I think what happened was maybe I broke strings and I ran out of rackets, and I grabbed this thing, which I actually at the time had not strung in a few months, kind of just put it down, put it away, because I switched over to these Dunlops, which was in my most recent video. I think I just started hitting with this without a dampener, not really thinking about it, and I noticed, wow, that's a lot of tingly sensations going down the handle. And as weird as tingly sensations is to say on camera, I don't really know how else to describe the sensation, because if I just say feel is so subjective. If you ask somebody which racket feels better or even has more feel, you'll get a very different description as to what they mean by feel. So maybe tingly sensation traveling down the handle is a better description. Some people might call that feedback. Again, there's a lot of terminology that isn't super clearly defined in the tennis world. Anyway, I hit some balls with this and I noticed, wow, that's a lot of feedback. I'm not gonna keep saying tingly sensation. We're just not gonna do that. And I thought maybe it's just because I've taken off the dampener, but I went to some other rackets later and I noticed not even close to as much feel. And that actually sent me down this journey of wanting that. So I actually haven't been playing with the dampener in a while, and I've just been testing rackets like crazy with the same preferences I've always had, like small grommets and parallel drilling, something really spin friendly. And I gotta say, my experience was really inconsistent. One of the most disorienting parts of that journey was coming to these two seemingly identical head extremes with the same string in there. It was Hyper G 16L, like identical, same tension. They're both demos, both strung around the same time, the bass grip and everything, it's the same, okay? One racket had so much feedback and the other one had virtually none. How could that be? And my frustration with this is that one person trying the one with a lot of feedback would say, hey, this racket has really good feel, the head extremes have really good feel. And another person might try the other one and just say the head extremes actually don't have that much feel at all. Because why would two rackets that should be the same have that much variation in feel? And just to put it clearly, the one that had a lot of feedback or feel, tingles, that was kind of on the end of the spectrum of that's a lot. And the other one was kind of on the other end of like, that's barely any at all. It's extremely muted. And I understand quality control discrepancies. I don't expect every racket to be balanced and matched, etc., stock. But I was surprised to think that there could be that much variation in the sensation of the racket, from virtually no feel or tingles to a lot. And I also tried this Dunlop CX 200 Tour, the 1820 model from the last generation with like the brighter metallic red look. That one had a ton of feel, and that was actually with some really, really old Wasabi X that I strung in that racket, like super old, very low tension. That one had a ton of vibration feedback. And coming back to this racket, which kind of started the awareness of that all, I just thought maybe the Pure Aero VS, that's what this racket is. It's super painted up and stuff, custom. Yes, I did this paint job. No, I would not recommend painting your own racket. It is an absolute nightmare to do, and the results are not so good. I'll talk more about this another time. I'm gonna get this racket custom painted by a professional sometime, but it's not worth trying yourself unless you really know what you're doing. and you have like automotive grade paint and paint guns and a whole setup and everything, you will never get a factory quality paint job with spray paint. I think it's just impossible. Anyway, this Pure Aero VS was offering me a lot of feedback sensation. And the thing that really threw me for a loop was it had 16 gauge 0 in the mains. Now, I don't necessarily market 0 as being one of the higher feel strings. It is a phenomenal tension maintenance string, top spin string, and durability string. There's a lot of amazing things where I think 0 is virtually unmatched in the tennis string world. And I had sync in the crosses, which I actually might pitch as a feel string. So at some point, I felt like maybe the VS just has better feel because I had that same setup in 17 gauge on a Pure Aero 98. The Pure Aero 98 felt muted in comparison, and I had that same setup on these Dunlops in 17 gauge, which again felt more muted than the Pure Aero VS. So what I did was I eventually broke those strings, or maybe I cut them out. I don't know, it'd been so long, maybe they were too loose for me to keep playing with. I cut them out and I put 17 gauge in 0. With 17 gauge sync. So the only thing that changed is fresh string job. I went from 16 gauge to 17 gauge, right? So we're going to a thinner string, 0 in the mains with 17 gauge sync, just like I did last time, right? And thinner gauge strings are supposed to have more feel. Well, I strung that up and I played with it, and it actually then felt about as muted as the other rackets that I had tested. And then that got me thinking, was it just the fresh string job that doesn't feel as good? Or does 17 gauge 0 actually give me less feel than 16 gauge 0 for some reason? But then I thought back to those head extremes and couldn't think of any logical reason that one extreme would feel so differently than the other when they had the same string. And so without much rational reasoning, I sort of impulsively decided to try this. It is a Dunlop SX 600, very similar to these 300s, except that it is extended by 1/4 inch and the head size is 105 as opposed to 98 or 100, which are the two models that I have here. It's kind of like the beginner, oversized, easy power, light swinging racket of the SX series. Anyway, when I grabbed this, I thought it was a 1619. It's actually a 1618. I was like, oh no. And the demo, which this is still a demo, came with some like multi or syngut, and that virtually offered me no feel at all. I don't know how old it was. I don't know what tension it was at. It was kind of at a higher tension, didn't feel very loose, but yeah, no feel. Anyway, I cut those out because multis and syngut, I hate them, and I put in what you see here, which is 0 16 gauge in the mains with Wasabi X in the crosses. And guess what? I think I strung this at 54 pounds in the mains and 57 in the crosses. In hindsight, I could have gone a little bit higher, a few pounds. But this also gives me a lot of feel. Why would this be? Let's talk about the differences here. I had both of these rackets strung up with 17 gauge 0 sync in the crosses, and they absolutely offered me less feel than this did. I would also say sync, in my experience, people's experience, seems to be a decent feel string, more so than Wasabi X might be, but this 16 gauge 0 with 17 gauge Wasabi X in the crosses is giving me more feel than the smaller 0 with sync did in this. Why would that be? What are some variations here that make these rackets different that may or may not matter? This is the 300 Tour, so this is the 98. This one has one less cross string and the head size is bigger and the strings are spaced further apart and the racket is lighter. Are those reasons that would contribute to more vibrations transmitting down to the handle? Or is it just some random racket difference, which may have been the case between those two head extremes that caused one to give a lot of sensation and the other one to feel quite muted? Why would this offer more feel? I genuinely don't understand. The one consistent thing between all these experiences where I'm getting more feel or more feedback, more vibrations coming down the handle, is that those examples always had 16 gauge 0 in the mains. Between all the little variations I've messed around with, it was always the 16 gauge 0 ones that gave me more feedback. And so yesterday I strung my 300, this is the 100 square inch size of the SX series. I strung this one up with Wasabi X in the crosses, 16 gauge 0 in the mains, just like we have here. at the same tension, because I thought this one should be a little higher. It's a little bit launchy, but this being a slightly smaller head size with an extra cross string, I felt like doing the same tension would kind of be closer to where I want. So anyway, that's why I did this again at 54 mains, 57 crosses. And I've yet to hit with it, but just from bouncing a ball around, it's giving me a little bit more feel than I think the last strings in here did. And I'm starting to wonder if for any reason 16 gauge really does offer more feel than 17 gauge in this string, or perhaps in general. And if the case, why would that be? Do thicker strings somehow transmit vibrations more reliably? Does the amount of surface area the string is making contact at with the grommet increase the vibrations being transmitted? Because a thicker string would technically contact the racket more. Its contact patch would be wider, which might increase opportunity to transmit vibrations to the racket, as opposed to a really thin string that's not really contacting it at all. But I can also see the argument that thicker strings dampen more. They're thicker, they're heavier, maybe they don't vibrate as sensitively. I don't know, there's a lot of ways you could look at it, but my experience is ultimately anecdotal, and all I have here is conventional wisdom to go off of, which my experience is actually kind of going against, and whatever logic I can piece together to explain why this might be the case. And it also feels like one logical reason could be that it's just a racket variable, and the quality control discrepancies between rackets could absolutely be the reason two otherwise identical rackets could feel so different. So that's been a frustrating journey for me, actually, because I actually want that feedback. I think it's good to have the feedback. It's nice to have a really solid idea of where and how I made contact with the ball based on the sensations. I think before I never really cared about that, but I always played with a dampener because I didn't like the sound, that pinging sound of hitting a ball, which in person isn't as bad as it usually comes through on a microphone, by the way. Some people just see a video without me hitting with a dampener like, oh God, put a dampener on there, it's so bad, but that's because it's coming through the microphone in a very tinny way. And if you're really playing, you're not really thinking about that. I've been playing without a dampener for over a month now, and I wonder if I'll go back. We'll see. I don't know what my conclusion is going to be at the end of this journey. Right now, it's a mess. I'm just updating you guys to update you on what my racket journey is currently, and I guess I'm partially making this video in hopes to better understand why my experience would be what it's been. But I will be hitting with this, and maybe that will give me some answers, because this is the same string job as this, but the rackets are very similar but slightly different. Different models in the same lineup. My last little theory here was that stringing at lower tensions might offer better vibration feedback because lower strings would vibrate more easily. So I think a lot of those vibrations would transmit with more intensity or just happen more easily. When I first strung this racket in the way that made me feel as much as I did and sent me on this whole journey, I don't know what I did, but by the time that I tried it again and noticed, I'm sure the tension had dropped a decent amount. You could kind of hear it. It had a lower frequency sound than the rackets I was hitting with, which were fresher. Is fresher a word? It should be. So that may have been due to the strings being loose. That Dunlop in the example I mentioned, the CX200 Tour, that was definitely loose. It was super old Wasabi X. And arguably this one is a little bit too loose relative to the racket. Like, it's a big head size, super open strings. It's a 16 by 18. I would definitely string this like 3, maybe 5 pounds higher than it is right now. So you could also say that this is loose relative to how I would like it to be. And maybe that's why I'm getting more vibration feedback than I would if it were at a higher tension. I don't know. Oh, and you might be wondering why this Wilson blade is here. That Wilson blade 104, which is what this is like a racket I've been so back and forth on, but the V9 has been updated with more stiffness than the V8, and I suppose maybe there's some other subtle layup differences. I've always loved the design of this racket. I think the grommets, the cutouts, and the string spacing and everything about this racket is actually really interesting. And I've been back and forth on this racket because the sweet spot looks a little bit lower than I want it to be, and its extended length, which is kind of an issue for me. Extended length rackets have a higher swing weight, which means they're much harder to swing, but that doesn't mean they're actually more stable because the swing weight comes from length, it doesn't come from actual weight. So it's hard to swing as if you did add weight, but it doesn't actually give you the stability of if you actually added weight. And you're making that trade-off just to have a ½ inch. Also the shape of it, you can see like the longest part is kind of down here. The sweet spot just feels lowered. So it feels like the racket has been extended, but then the sweet spot has been lowered. So it's like, okay, the contact area is sort of lower than it would be if I took this racket and extended it 1/2 inch. So it's like, why would I want this one if all that extension did was make the racket harder to swing? I don't know, but I might string up this racket because I'm very curious if it has good feel. If it does have good feel, that would throw me for another loop and make me curious about this racket again. But I really like the Blade 104 V8. I ultimately didn't switch to it for too long. That was around the time that I realized the dilemma with extended length rackets. And yeah, I'm crawling back to this one with a new version, some updates to the layup, curiosity, and just, yeah, what if this racket has really good feel? So more on this racket later. And last but not least, be sure to check out my affiliate links. I work with Restring and Toro Line. They both make my favorite strings, but this little field journey I've been on has had me focusing on Restring recently. But I do have Wasabi X in here, and I have Wasabi X in here. All three of these have 0 in the mains. This one has sync in the crosses. Highly recommend 0 and sync. It's an amazing hybrid for topspin, durability, but also feel. And I wonder if 16 gauge would give you better feel than 17 gauge does. Give it a try if you want to. But if you want to stay tuned on my journey, just be sure to subscribe or stay in touch with me on the DMs. You can check me out on Instagram, same handle as it is on YouTube, and all the other links and discounts I have below, you can find in the bio of my Instagram, but also in the description of this video. The most interesting of which might be a 15% discount on tennis rackets. Link for that below. Use my code T4T15. So that's time for tennis, but T4T15. It's a temporary 15% discount code on Direct Tennis if you download the app, which is the only way to get these rackets. Download the app, navigate through the storefront. It's a little bit finicky of an app. It's still kind of in the development stages, but you can get 15% off of a racket, which is a huge discount. Dunlop SXs, Pure Aero 98s, Blade 104s, or whatever you want. Could be an E-Zone, Percept, Headspeed Pros, Head Gravities, the new Dunlop CX series. They have all the new stuff, is what I'm trying to say. But they probably definitely don't have a butchered paint job Pure Aero VS. Only I have that. We'll see if I ever sell this. Maybe I'll give it a custom paint job and then auction it off. Nah, I'll probably keep it. Kind of a hard racket to get. Anyway, stay tuned. I've been busy with the move, but I am feeling pretty behind on content. I look forward to catching up with longer format videos and getting some of the stuff I wish was out there by now, but isn't, and some of the new stuff coming up. So yeah, stay tuned and be sure to subscribe. This little racket journey kind of cut in the front of other priorities because it was so disorienting. I'm like, wait, what? And I just had to go on this rabbit hole to figure something out about racket feel, but that journey will probably come to a close relatively soon. I don't know, but if you guys stay tuned, you'll know when I know. Appreciate you guys watching. Thank you. I'm going to cook some bacon and eggs and do my coffee shout out real quick. Wasabi X, what are you doing here? I need to tidy up. Ugh. All right, thank you again for the coffee donation. If you want to donate directly to the channel, I will shout you out in a future video. You guys can go to buy me a coffee. Link for that is below. But you can also send a donation via PayPal, which is what Ronnie did. So thank you again, Ronnie. There's my sip. I'll always take a sip of coffee or whatever my drink is for the shout out. And thank you everybody for your support. I will be back soon catching up on content, but we'll leave it at that for now. I try to get back to all the comments. You can DM me on Instagram as well. I will see you guys in a future video. All right, bye. Yo, why is this guy wearing a Hawaiian shirt? In Vegas? Is he trying to look like a tourist?